Welcome, my friends and viewers, to this week's episode of Legendlore, where I draw and talk about monsters, characters, gods, and other things from D&D 5th edition, all while giving a small but quickly digestible history about them. Together we'll go over their history within the game, how they're utilized in the modern edition, and how you guys can utilize them in your own games. This week we're going to be covering a classic, the jump-scaring, paranoia-inducing shapeshifters known as mimics. Getting right into it, mimics appeared back in the first editions of D&D. Being of the monstrosity creature type and carrying an alignment of neutral in most instances, despite the horror stories that most people tell about encountering them. Mimics, as per their name, were capable of assuming the shape of any inanimate object, provided that the object matched their overall body mass. The older and stronger that the mimic was, the larger an object that they could pretend to be, and due to adventurers being their most commonly encountered prey, they often took on the shapes of doors, chests, and other objects that were most likely to be touched or interacted with. On a scientific level, mimics were capable of altering the color and texture of their skins to match the objects that they were imitating, done so by pumping a blue-toned fluid from their muscular organs through most of their skin. From there, their musculature would mold, broaden, flatten, or otherwise change to match the form of the object, leading me to suspect that mimics themselves actually don't have bones, as they would be extremely hard to change and maneuver in such a way. Mimics would also only be able to change into objects that they themselves have seen and felt, and trying to shapeshift into an object without knowing any information about it can oftentimes give a mimic away. Beyond that, mimics were capable of sensing surfaces and the presence of other creatures via skin sensors that could detect both heat and light, ranging outwards of almost 90 feet, and because of this, bright lights could render a mimic temporarily blind if overexposed. The many eyes that are often associated with the formation or revealing of a mimic to actually only be cosmetic at most. When it comes to hunting for food, mimics opted for a Venus flytrap approach in assuming the form of an object and standing perfectly still until the creature came into contact with them. From there, they could secrete a powerful adhesive onto their skin to trap them, before restraining them further using pseudopods or new hands and devouring them with a formation of teeth-like appendages. The mimic's adhesive fluid was moderately strong but could be dissolved with both alcohol or other solvents. In terms of smarts, mimics were not traditionally intelligent, concerning themselves with only survival and hunting for food. However, there were mimic subtypes that were capable of understanding or even speaking basic forms of common and other languages. But overall, mimics had no real culture, moral code, or interest in religion or higher concepts. Whether or not this means that a mimic can be trained as a pet is up to your dungeon master. For components that could be extracted from the mimic, the main two I previously described would be the mimic's camouflaging skin fluid and its skin adhesive. The former could be used as a magical component for transmutation-based disguising potions like polymorph, or a paint that could actually be used to emulate the materials of the subject that the artist is painting. Imagine gazing at a painting of a grassy field to only realize that the green pastures actually felt like the real thing upon touching. On the other hand, the latter can make for a great fantasy world glue or adhesive, and could possibly be a key ingredient in the creation of the legendary Sovereign glue. Furthermore, mimic skin can be tanned, sewn, and used for cloaks of camouflage, or even molded into the soles of boots for more versatile traveling gear. The soles can become soft and quiet during times where you must sneak about, or sharp and cleat-like should you need to climb a tree or a rock face. In a more contemporary setting, some people claim that mimic adhesive could also be made into an extremely exquisite perfume that could smell like the scent of whatever the person who was smelling it liked the most. That and mimic organs were said to be a delicacy amongst noble circles, possibly for the same reason in that it would taste like whatever the person desired the most. I imagine that a chef that had the capability to handle and prepare mimic meat in such a way would be in very high demand. The history of the mimic isn't exactly known, but most people believe that it started out as a magical creature artificially created by wizards and nobles, in order to serve as a deterrent and diversion to protect their treasures against thieves. However, others speculate that their malleable forms and strangeness hint at origins within the far realm. Incidentally, it would be interesting to have a thief who has a mimic trained to impersonate the very object that they're looking to steal, allowing them to have a few weeks or even months buffer before their mark discovers the theft. Mimics have been known to impersonate not just small objects, but statues, plants, and public structures within urban areas, feeding off of animals and unsuspecting nightly travelers. There's even a story of a massive mimic capable of impersonating an entire cave or dungeon, tricking adventurers in so deep that they have no hope of escape. Despite sharing their territories with other species, mimics were traditionally solitary hunters and could subsist for weeks off of one or two full humanoids. They were capable of recognizing and speaking to one another in their own noiseless language, and reproduced asexually by splitting off and growing into adulthood after a few years. Incidentally, a party could train a mimic as a sort of self-bloodhound, capable of sniffing out other mimics that might be lying in wait. Some species of mimics included the larger, less intelligent killer mimics, known for taking the shape of simple structures and being incredibly aggressive. And then there was the smaller, more cunning common mimic, which was capable of taking on more complex forms and using more refined combat tactics. Common mimics were even able to go so far as to negotiate and bargain, allowing adventurers to pass through their territory in exchange for food. Wizards and scholars were able to train book mimics to emulate the covers of books in order to protect them from the elements, feeding them with food and spots of blood, almost like a blood tax in exchange for access to the knowledge. Imagine an entire library where you have to give a bit of blood in order to gaze upon their pages. Lastly, despite their solitary nature, rare colonies of mimics could form and take the shape of large hordes, sprawling caverns, entire forests, or even deep dungeons. Imagine the party voyaging through an entire pit of forest only to realize that all of the trees are actually gone and replaced entirely with a massive colony of mimics. Now, when it comes to role-playing mimics at the table, most of them would have the same intelligence as about an animal, meaning that they focus primarily on food and survival unless trained to learn other behaviors, such as hunting, tricks, and so on. As such, mimics can become great party pets and perform a variety of different tricks, such as impersonating valuable gear to fool thieves, pretending to be weapons in order to surprise the enemy, and sniffing out other mimics in dungeons to keep the party safe. There's also a couple of interesting scenarios that you could run when using mimics. First, Treasure Swarm. While in the midst of a dungeon, your party can discover a large chest seated at the center of a room. Of course, they're going to ask to test and see if it's a mimic, and of course the chest itself will end up just being a normal wooden chest. However, upon cracking it open, they'll discover that every single coin and jewel nestled inside the chest is a mimic. Next, we have a Mimic Museum. In this idea, you would have a museum that holds historical and legendary artifacts within their glass cases, but have little to no guarding or protective presence which the party can know. A thief who sneaks in at night can discover that nearly every single artifact in the museum is a mimic, made to emulate the display, while the real ones are either kept hidden inside or the museum just flat out does not actually own them at all, and it's all just a giant scam. The key to good mimic roleplay is deception. Modern players have been conditioned to expect most doors, chests, and other various objects to be mimics, so make them into things that are not particularly expected. Make your mimics helmets, pieces of armor, weapons, four-post beds, safes that pretend to be locked in order to draw in prey, chandeliers that can drop onto your party unsuspectingly, and so on, whatever fits your situation. When running mimics in combat, the best way to challenge your players is to have your mimic follow its common hunting practices, waiting until someone tries to mess around with it, and then grabbing them to drag off into a dark corner to eat. Beyond that, they're pretty standard in their ability department, so challenge your party by making multiple mimics be part of the same setup. Not only is the door a mimic, but so is the door frame, the handle, the nuts and bolts, the hinges, and so on. What is expected to be a single mimic now becomes 7 or 8, a great way to throw your party in for a loop. You could also use the mimic's chosen form at the moment to inform their combat abilities. For instance, if a mimic is in the shape of a large closet, it can devour an enemy and keep it inside of its mouth while it fights the others. If a mimic takes the form of a table, it can get multi-attack, making one attack for each table leg. These are just a couple of basic ideas, but I'm pretty sure you can come up with others. In terms of adventure and quest hooks regarding mimics, they themselves don't really get much beyond possibly asking the party to collect them some specific type of food in exchange for letting them pass through their territory unharmed. However, those who seek to collect mimic components can send the party out on harvesting missions, allowing you to place those mimics in a variety of different dungeon types and situations. Upon return, the NPC can reward them with potions of polymorph, a small bottle of sovereign glue, and so on. As for mimic-based magic items, mimics unfortunately don't really have a strong palette to draw from, but here are a couple of things that I figured could fit in regards to flavor and components that a mimic drops, or can be made out of the components that you extract from them. And finally, for our homebrew magic item this evening, we have Mimic Plate, which is a set of +1 plate armor that requires attunement and is actually a living mimic, trained to protect the wearer so long as it's fed and cared for. This armor is counted as a creature, not an object, meaning that it can be targeted by effects that target creatures, but cannot be targeted by effects that target objects. Furthermore, the wearer of this armor gets advantage on all stealth checks, as the armor replicates all nearby surroundings. Thusly, all enemies also have disadvantage on perception check to find them, at least those based on sight and touch. I'm not exactly sure if mimics can replicate the smell of anything, but that's up to you. And lastly, twice per encounter, upon being hit by a melee attack, the wearer can activate the armor's adhesive secretion as a reaction. The damage is reduced by 1d8 plus the wearer's proficiency bonus, and the target must make a DC 16 strength saving throw or have the weapon be disarmed, now attached to the plate. This is very good for your armor-wearing tanks who want to try and disarm foes who are using weapons, and could possibly even be tweaked in order to include natural attacks causing them to be grappled, as they stick to the mimic adhesive. You can even go further and give the armor its own saves, AC, HP, and all that, but for the purposes of this video, I figured I would just stick with the basics. And with that, that's the Mimic, everybody. I want to thank all you guys for watching and for sticking with me despite the long upload times. And if you guys enjoyed this video, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Let me know how you guys have used or encountered mimics in your games, and also let me know what you guys would like to see in upcoming videos. But until then, I'll see you guys next time.